They thought her silence was surrender. That's what everyone believed as they watched Amara Blake sit motionless in Courtroom 7C, her hands folded on the polished oak table like a prayer she'd already given up on. For 3 days, she hadn't spoken, hadn't objected, hadn't even flinched when her ex-husband's lawyer called her an unfit mother in front of a room full of strangers with cameras. The media called her cold. The jury whispered she looked guilty. Her own attorney begged her to fight back. But Amara just sat there, staring straight ahead at the brass scales of justice hanging behind Judge Whitmore's bench, as if she were waiting for something no one else could see. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly understand, was that Amara wasn't silent because she had nothing to say. She was silent because she was counting down to one very specific moment. And when that moment came, silence wouldn't just be her weapon. It would be Victor's undoing. The air conditioning in the Superior Court hummed with a low, mechanical drone that seemed to amplify the suffocating tension. Judge Whitmore, a stern man in his late 60s with silver hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, shuffled papers with the exhausted efficiency of someone ready to close another case and move on with his docket. Across the aisle sat Victor Blake, 46, handsome in that carefully maintained way wealthy men achieve, his salt and pepper hair styled perfectly, his charcoal suit tailored to emphasize success without arrogance. His face had graced the covers of real estate magazines. His name was on buildings across 3 states. When he smiled, which he did often, it was the smile of a man who'd never been denied anything he truly wanted. Next to him sat Gerald Hawthorne, a defense attorney whose reputation preceded him like smoke before fire. Hawthorne was 60, lean, with the predatory stillness of a snake. He didn't just win cases, he dismantled opponents so thoroughly they left the profession. On Amara's side of the courtroom sat Rebecca Chun, a court-appointed attorney who looked perpetually overwhelmed. She was competent, hard-working, but drowning. And she knew it. Amara herself wore a simple gray dress. No jewelry except her daughter's elementary school art project turned into a necklace, a clay heart painted purple. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. At 39, she looked tired, but not broken. There was something unsettling about her stillness, like deep water. "Mr. Hawthorne," Judge Whitmore said, "your closing statement regarding custody?" Hawthorne rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket. "Thank you, Your Honor." He paced slowly before the jury box, his voice rich with manufactured concern. "The facts are unfortunate, but clear. Ms. Blake has demonstrated a pattern of emotional distance, financial instability, and questionable judgment. We've heard testimony from child care providers. We've seen documentation of missed appointments, forgotten school events, and inability to maintain stable housing." Victor nodded sadly, the picture of a father forced into a painful position. "My client has provided a structured, affluent environment. Private schools, healthcare, stability." Hawthorne gestured toward Victor. "He's offering Ms. Blake a generous settlement, one she frankly doesn't deserve given her conduct during the marriage. But he's doing it for their daughter's sake." Amara didn't move. In the gallery, reporters leaned forward. A sketch artist captured her blank expression. A blogger typed furiously, "Blake ex-wife unresponsive, appears defeated." Rebecca Chin scribbled notes frantically, her hand shaking. She leaned toward Amara. "We're losing," she whispered urgently. "If you don't speak now, we lose custody. We lose everything." Amara turned her head slightly. Her eyes, green and impossibly calm, met Rebecca's. "Not yet," she said softly. Rebecca's face crumpled with desperation. But Amara had already turned back toward the front, her expression once again unreadable. Hawthorne continued, "Ms. Blake hasn't defended herself, hasn't refuted a single claim. The silence speaks volumes, Your Honor. She knows she cannot provide what this child needs." The judge made a note. He looked at Amara. "Ms. Blake, your attorney may present closing arguments." Rebecca stood, her voice less steady than Hawthorne's. "Your Honor, my client loves her daughter. The witnesses against her are all employed by Mr. Blake. There's clear bias." "Objection," Hawthorne said lazily. "The witnesses testified under oath." "Sustained," Judge Whitmore said. "Ms. Chun, unless you have substantive evidence, move on." Rebecca sat down heavily. She looked at Amara desperately. Amara's fingers, resting on the table, tapped once, twice, a rhythm only she understood. Judge Whitmore removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I've heard enough. This court will take a brief recess, but I'm prepared to render a decision today. He looked directly at Amara. Ms. Blake, you've exercised your right to silence throughout these proceedings. That is your prerogative. But I want to be clear, your lack of engagement has not helped your case. The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but everyone in the room heard it anyway. Victor leaned toward Hawthorne, smirking. Told you she'd crumble. Hawthorne's smile was thin and sharp. She already has. But Amara hadn't crumbled. Her back was straight, her breathing even. And if anyone had been watching closely, if anyone had cared to look past their assumptions, they would have seen it. The faintest trace of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Judge Whitmore stood. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. The courtroom began to empty, and Amara Blake finally allowed herself the smallest of smiles. 7 years earlier, Amara hadn't been silent. She'd been the woman across the hotel ballroom that Victor Blake couldn't look away from. The annual Tech and Development Gala was the kind of event where million-dollar deals were made over salmon and asparagus, where venture capitalists prowled like sharks, where being seen mattered more than being genuine. Amara was there as a guest of her employer, a cybersecurity firm where she worked as a digital compliance auditor, though no one ever asked what that meant. When people asked what she did, their eyes glazed over after the first sentence. Victor asked, or at least, he pretended to. Digital compliance? He'd said, handing her a champagne flute. That sounds technical. She'd smiled. It is. And important. Very. We track financial crimes. Recover encrypted data. Find things people try to hide. He'd laughed. Charming, disarming. Remind me never to hide anything from you. It was the first lie he told her. But not the last. Victor was magnetic. Successful. At 39, he'd built Blake Development from a single property investment into an empire. He took her to dinners where senators shook his hand. He introduced her to rooms full of people who smiled and nodded, but never quite saw her. And slowly, carefully, he made her world smaller. You don't need to work so much, he said 6 months into their relationship. I can take care of you. I like my work, she replied. I know, but imagine having time for other things. For us, it wasn't a demand. It was a suggestion wrapped in silk. When they married, she kept her job. But Victor's world was loud, consuming. There were galas, networking events, business trips where she was expected to smile and be beautiful and not mention encryption algorithms or forensic data recovery. People stopped asking what she did. They asked who she wore, whose wife she was. And Amara, slowly, learned to observe rather than participate. She noticed things. How Victor's tone changed when he was challenged. How his smile disappeared behind closed doors. How he controlled through expectation rather than force, steering conversations, dismissing her opinions with a laugh, making her feel like she was overreacting when she questioned him. You're so serious, Amara, he'd say. Not everything is a conspiracy. So she stopped questioning and started documenting. When Lena was born 3 years into their marriage, everything shifted. Amara loved her daughter with a ferocity that surprised her. This tiny human who looked at her like she hung the moon. But Victor loved Lena differently. Lena was his legacy, his success, proof that Victor Blake could build a perfect life. She'll go to Hampton Preparatory, he announced when Lena was 6 months old. That's 10 years away, Amara said. Exactly. We plan ahead. Amara learned that arguing changed nothing. Victor didn't yell. He didn't need to. He simply proceeded as if her concerns didn't exist. When she suggested Lena might be too young for structured activities, Victor enrolled her anyway. When Amara wanted to reduce Lena's schedule, Victor added tutoring. I'm doing this for her future, he'd say. And Amara would nod. And watch. She watched how he corrected Lena constantly. How his affection was conditional on performance. How Lena, at 4 years old, already apologized for things that weren't her fault. One evening, Amara found Lena crying in her room. What's wrong, baby? Daddy said I'm not trying hard enough at piano. Amara's chest tightened. You're doing great. But Daddy said. I know what Daddy said. Amara pulled her daughter close. But I'm telling you something different. You're perfect exactly as you are. Lena looked up, confused. Daddy's perfect. You said so. Amara's breath caught. Had she said that? Had she let Lena believe that Victor's impossible standards were normal? That night, after Lena fell asleep, Amara sat in her home office, the small room Victor barely noticed, and made a decision. She couldn't fight Victor directly. He controlled the finances, the social circle, the narrative. He was beloved publicly, intimidating privately. If she challenged him openly, she'd lose. He'd position her as unstable, irrational. He'd take Lena and make Amara disappear from her daughter's life. But if she stayed quiet, if she observed, documented, prepared, silence could be more powerful than any argument. Amara opened her laptop, created an encrypted folder, and began. She didn't know what she was preparing for yet, but she knew she was preparing for something. Because the best defense wasn't noise. It was patience. 2 years later, on a Tuesday evening in March, Amara's phone rang at 11:47 p.m. She was already awake. Victor was in Chicago for a development conference, and Lena was sleeping over at his penthouse apartment downtown where he stayed during the week. The arrangement was Victor's idea. She should experience both environments. The caller ID said Seattle Children's Hospital. Amara's hands went cold. "Ms. Blake." The voice was professional, gentle. "This is Dr. Patel from the emergency department. Your daughter Lena was brought in about 40 minutes ago. She's stable, but..." "What happened?" Amara was already grabbing her keys. "She has a concussion and some bruising. Mr. Blake said she fell. We'd like you to come in." Amara drove through empty streets, her mind racing. Fell. Children fell. It happened. But something in the doctor's tone, that careful neutrality, made her stomach twist. When she arrived, a nurse led her to a private room. Lena was asleep, a small bandage on her temple, and 4 in her tiny arm. Victor stood by the window, still in his conference suit, his phone pressed to his ear. He glanced at Amara and held up one finger. "Wait." Amara sat beside Lena, taking her daughter's hand. So small, so breakable. Victor ended his call. "It was an accident," he said immediately. "She was playing, tripped over a toy, hit her head on the coffee table. I called 911 right away." "Where were you when it happened?" "In the other room. Conference call. I heard the impact," and he ran a hand through his hair, the picture of a shaken father. "It was terrifying, Amara." Dr. Patel entered, clipboard in hand. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and the exhausted professionalism of someone who'd seen too much. "Mr. and Mrs. Blake." "We're separated," Amara said quietly. Dr. Patel nodded. "Lena has a mild concussion. We'll keep her overnight for observation, but she should be fine. Children are resilient." She paused. "The injury is consistent with a fall. However, there's some bruising on her upper arm that concerns me. It looks like grip marks." Victor's expression didn't change. "She probably grabbed onto something when she fell. You know how kids thrash around." "Possibly," Dr. Patel said carefully. She looked at Amara. "Has Lena mentioned any accidents lately? Any unusual injuries?" Amara's mind raced. 3 weeks ago, Lena had a bruise on her shoulder. Victor said she'd bumped into a doorframe. Last month, a scraped knee, playground accident. Were there others? "Ms. Blake." Dr. Patel prompted. "No," Amara said. "Nothing unusual." But that was a lie, and they both knew it. After Dr. Patel left, Victor turned to Amara. "Don't read into this. Kids get hurt. You're overthinking." "Am I?" His voice hardened. "Yes. And if you start making accusations, it'll get ugly. For both of us. Think about custody, Amara." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Amara stayed at the hospital all night. Victor left at 2 a.m. "I have an early meeting." When Lena woke at dawn, she was groggy, confused. "Mama, I'm here, baby. My head hurts." "I know. The doctor said you fell. Do you remember?" Lena's face scrunched up, trying to remember. Daddy was mad. Amara's pulse spiked. "Mad about what?" "I spilled juice on his papers," he yelled. And then, Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I don't remember." "It's okay. You don't have to remember." But Amara needed to remember. For both of them. When Lena was discharged, Amara took her home, to Amara's modest apartment, not Victor's penthouse. She made soup, put on cartoons, tucked Lena into bed with extra pillows. Then she went to her office and opened her encrypted folder. She pulled the hospital records. She'd requested copies, told them it was for insurance. She photographed the bruises on Lena's arm before they faded. She wrote down everything Lena had said, time-stamped and detailed. Then she did something else. She requested the visitor logs from Victor's building. She pulled his credit card statements. She still had access from when they were married. She checked his calendar, cross-referenced it with his location data from the family tracking app he'd insisted they all use for safety. Victor said he was on a conference call when Lena fell, but his phone records showed no call at that time. He'd lied to the doctor. Amara sat back, her heart pounding. This wasn't an accident. She didn't have proof yet, not the kind that would hold up in court. But she had suspicion, and suspicion was enough to start digging. She spent the next 3 months quietly collecting data. She recovered deleted texts from their shared cloud. She saved voicemails. She documented every time Victor was late returning Lena, every time Lena came home with a new bruise and a vague explanation. She didn't confront him, didn't threaten him, didn't tell anyone what she suspected. Because Amara understood something fundamental: noise gets dismissed, evidence gets heard. And she was building a case so airtight that when the moment came, when Victor finally overplayed his hand, there would be nowhere for him to hide. 6 months after that hospital visit, Victor filed for divorce. He wanted full custody, and Amara let him think he'd win. The trial moved with the efficient brutality of a machine designed to produce predetermined results. Judge Whitmore made it clear from day one. He had a backlog. This wasn't a criminal case. It was a custody dispute. It needed to be resolved quickly. Victor's legal team moved like a coordinated assault. They presented financial statements showing Victor's wealth, stability, resources. They presented testimony from Lena's private school teachers, carefully selected, carefully coached, who described Victor as engaged and invested in his daughter's future. Then came the character assassination. A former neighbor testified that Amara seemed distant. A mother's group acquaintance said she never participated in community events. Victor's housekeeper, still on his payroll, described Amara as cold and preoccupied with work. Rebecca Chin objected. "These witnesses are biased, Your Honor. They're financially dependent on Mr. Blake." Overruled, Judge Whitmore said tiredly. "Their employment doesn't negate their observations." Amara sat through it all, silent as stone. On the third day, Victor himself took the stand. He wore a navy suit, a somber tie. He looked like a man reluctantly bearing painful truths. Hawthorne guided him through the narrative they'd constructed. "Mr. Blake, can you describe your relationship with your daughter?" "She's everything to me," Victor said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've tried to give her the best life possible. The best schools, the best opportunities." "And Ms. Blake's involvement?" Victor sighed. "Amara loves Lena. I don't doubt that. But she's struggling. Emotionally. Financially. I've offered to help, but she refuses. And I worry about Lena being in that environment." "Can you elaborate on that environment?" "A small apartment in a questionable neighborhood. Irregular work hours. Amara's a freelancer now. She lost her steady job after the separation. I don't think she can provide stability." It was all lies. Amara worked from home by choice. Her apartment was modest but safe. She'd left her corporate job because Victor had sabotaged it. She had the emails to prove it. But she said nothing. Rebecca leaned over. "Let me cross-examine him. I can tear this apart." Amara shook her head. "Not yet." "When?" Rebecca hissed. "He's destroying you. Soon." On the fourth day, Hawthorne played his final card. "Your Honor, my client has been more than generous. He's offering Ms. Blake a settlement of $5,000 monthly alimony and shared custody on weekends. Given the circumstances, I'd say that's remarkably fair." Judge Whitmore looked at Amara. "Ms. Blake, do you wish to respond to this offer?" Rebecca started to stand, but Amara placed a hand on her arm. "No, Your Honor," Amara said quietly. The gallery murmured. A reporter whispered into her phone. Even the bailiff looked surprised. Victor smirked. He leaned toward Hawthorne. "She's given up." Hawthorne nodded. "This'll be over by tomorrow." But Amara hadn't given up. She was watching the clock. That evening, Judge Whitmore reviewed the case files in his chambers. The evidence overwhelmingly favored Victor Blake. Stable income, impressive home, glowing character witnesses. The mother, by contrast, appeared passive, possibly depressed, certainly unable to match the father's resources. The next morning, Judge Whitmore entered the courtroom with his decision written. He'd grant Victor primary custody, give Amara supervised visitation, close the case before lunch. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, looked at the sea of faces waiting for justice that looked increasingly predetermined. Then he looked at Amara Blake. She sat exactly as she had for 4 days. Hands folded, back straight, eyes forward. But something about her stillness bothered him. It wasn't defeat. It was patience. Judge Whitmore paused. He'd been on the bench for 32 years. He'd seen guilty people protest their innocence loudly. He'd seen innocent people crumble under pressure. But he'd rarely seen someone so utterly, deliberately calm in the face of total loss. "Ms. Blake," he said slowly, setting down his prepared ruling. "Before I render my decision, I need to understand something." The courtroom went silent. Amara lifted her eyes to meet his. "Why?" Judge Whitmore asked. "Why have you remained silent through these proceedings? You haven't defended yourself. You haven't refuted any accusations. You haven't presented any evidence of your own. Why?" Rebecca grabbed Amara's arm. This was it. The opening they needed. Amara stood slowly. Every eye in the room locked on her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and steady. "May I answer your question by asking my ex-husband one question first?" Judge Whitmore leaned back, intrigued. "Mr. Blake, do you consent?" Victor laughed, short, confident. "Of course, Your Honor. I have nothing to hide." Hawthorne didn't look as certain, but it was too late to object. Amara turned to face Victor directly. For the first time in 4 days, she looked at him. "Victor," she said calmly, "where were you on the night of March 12th, the night Lena was hospitalized with a concussion?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Victor's smile didn't falter. "I already testified about this. I was in my apartment. Lena fell. It was an accident. And you were in the other room?" "Yes. On a conference call." "What time did the fall occur?" "Around 11:30 p.m. Amara nodded slowly. "Thank you for confirming that." Under oath. Something in her tone made Hawthorne sit up straighter. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Ms. Blake, where is this going?" Amara reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit A, filed under seal this morning with your clerk." Hawthorne shot to his feet. "Objection. This is an ambush. We were never provided." "It was filed at 7 a.m., Judge Whitmore said, checking his computer. Before proceedings began. He looked at Hawthorne. "Sit down, counselor." The bailiff brought the drive to the bench. Judge Whitmore plugged it in. The room waited. And Amara Blake, for the first time in 4 days, allowed herself to smile. Not with triumph. With relief. Because silence hadn't been surrender. It had been strategy. Judge Whitmore's face changed as he clicked through the files. His expression shifted from curiosity to concentration to something harder, sharper. The look of a man realizing he'd almost made a terrible mistake. He adjusted his glasses, scrolled down, clicked another folder. His jaw tightened. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent. Victor's confident smile had frozen in place, becoming something brittle. Hawthorne leaned toward his client, whispering urgently. Rebecca gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Judge Whitmore finally looked up. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet. "Mr. Blake, you testified that on March 12th, you were on a conference call when your daughter fell. Is that correct?" Victor nodded quickly. "Yes, Your Honor. A client in Tokyo. Time difference required a late call. And this call occurred at approximately 11:30 p.m.? "Yes." Judge Whitmore clicked something on his screen. "Ms. Blake, would you like to explain what I'm looking at?" Amara stood. She didn't walk toward the witness stand. She didn't need to. She simply stood in place, and every person in that room leaned forward to hear her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady and clear. "That USB drive contains 3 categories of evidence. The first is Mr. Blake's phone records from March 12th. You'll see that no conference call took place at 11:30 p.m. In fact, his phone was completely inactive from 10:47 p.m. until 12:03 a.m. Victor's face paled slightly. There must be an error. I used the landline." The second category, Amara continued as if he hadn't spoken, is the building's keycard access log from Mr. Blake's apartment complex. You'll see that someone entered his apartment at 11:52 p.m. that night, 22 minutes after he claims Lena fell. Hawthorne stood. "Your Honor, my client may have been mistaken about the exact time." "I'm not finished," Amara said quietly. Judge Whitmore held up a hand. "Let her speak." Amara's eyes never left Victor. The third category is an audio file. It was recorded by the baby monitor in Mr. Blake's guest room, the room where Lena sleeps during her overnight visits. Mr. Blake didn't know that particular monitor has a backup recording feature that saves to a cloud server when it detects loud noises. Victor stood up. That's illegal. You can't record someone without. It's a one-party consent state when the recording involves potential child endangerment, Amara said. I checked. Judge Whitmore's expression was stone. Play the file. Amara looked at the bailiff. Folder 3. File marked March 12th, 11:31 p.m. The bailiff clicked it. Speakers crackled to life. At first, there was only ambient noise. Then a door opening. Then Victor's voice, not the smooth, controlled voice he used in public, but something raw and angry. How many times do I have to tell you? When I'm working, you don't interrupt. A child's voice, small and frightened. Daddy, I just wanted water. You're 6 years old. Get it yourself. The cups are too high. Then climb. A pause. Then, don't look at me like that. You're not a baby anymore, Lena. Soft crying. Stop it. Stop crying right now. The crying continued. Then a sound. A sharp intake of breath. A louder cry. And Victor's voice, cold and final. I said stop. A crash. A child screaming. Then silence. Then Victor again, his voice calmer now. Calculated. Okay. Okay. You fell. That's what happened. You ran to get water, and you fell. Do you understand? You fell. Lena's voice, barely a whisper. It hurts, Daddy. I know. We'll fix it. But you have to say you fell. Can you do that for Daddy? The recording ended. The courtroom erupted. Gasps. Whispers escalating into shouts. A reporter bolted for the door. The sketch artist's hand had stopped moving entirely. Victor's face had gone from pale to gray. That's edited. She manipulated. Judge Whitmore slammed his gavel down 3 times. Order. I will have order. The room fell silent. Victor looked at Amara. Really looked at her. And for the first time, he saw her clearly. Not as the quiet wife he'd underestimated. Not as the mother he could easily defeat. But as the woman who had been 3 steps ahead of him the entire time. You, he whispered. You've been planning this. For 2 years, Amara said calmly. Since the night you told me not to read into things. Since you threatened me with custody. Since you made me choose between fighting you openly and losing my daughter, or waiting until I had proof you couldn't deny. Hawthorne was frantically packing his briefcase. Your Honor, I need to confer with my client. I wasn't made aware. Sit down, Mr. Hawthorne, Judge Whitmore said, his voice like iron. You're not going anywhere. He turned to Victor. Mr. Blake, you've committed perjury in my courtroom. You've lied under oath about the circumstances of your daughter's injury. And based on this recording, you've admitted to physically harming a child and coaching her to lie to medical professionals. I never touched her, Victor said desperately. The recording is out of context. The recording, Judge Whitmore said, will be reviewed by the appropriate authorities. Bailiff. 2 officers moved toward Victor. Victor's eyes went wild. He looked at Hawthorne, at the judge, at the reporters now filming everything. This is insane. She's manipulated all of you. She's a mother, Judge Whitmore said quietly, who protected her child by documenting your abuse until she could prove it beyond doubt. That's not manipulation, Mr. Blake. That's evidence. The bailiff reached Victor. Sir, I need you to stand up. Victor didn't move. He stared at Amara. You waited, he said, his voice hollow. You let me think I'd won. Amara met his gaze. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but unyielding. I waited because silence isn't weakness. Silence is preparation. And you never saw it coming because you never thought I was smart enough to beat you. Victor opened his mouth, closed it. He had nothing left to say. As the bailiff took his arm, Victor Blake, the man who'd built an empire, who'd controlled rooms with a smile, who'd believed his money and reputation made him untouchable, finally understood. He'd lost. Not because Amara had fought louder, but because she'd waited longer. Judge Whitmore looked at Amara. Ms. Blake, I'm granting you sole custody effective immediately. Mr. Blake's visitation rights are suspended pending a full investigation. And I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office. Amara nodded once. Thank you, Your Honor. As the courtroom dissolved into chaos, Amara gathered her things. Rebecca grabbed her arm, tears streaming down her face. You knew. This whole time you knew. I hoped, Amara corrected quietly. But I couldn't risk him settling before he committed perjury. I needed him to lie under oath. I needed it to be irrefutable. She walked toward the exit. Reporters swarmed, but she moved through them like water. Behind her, Victor Blake was being handcuffed. And Amara Blake, for the first time in 4 days, allowed herself to breathe. The question had been asked. The answer had changed everything. The chaos in Courtroom 7C reached a fever pitch. Victor Blake stood frozen between two bailiffs, his face a mask of disbelief and mounting panic. The confident real estate mogul who'd walked into the courtroom 4 days ago had vanished, replaced by a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Judge Whitmore wasn't finished. "Ms. Blake," he said, his voice cutting through the noise, "you mentioned 3 categories of evidence. We've reviewed the phone records, the access logs, and the audio recording. Is there anything else the court should know?" Amara remained standing, her gray dress suddenly looking less like defeat and more like armor. "Yes, Your Honor." Mr. Blake testified extensively about his financial situation, specifically that most of his wealth is tied up in company stock and that he's barely liquid enough to cover legal fees. Victor's eyes widened. "Don't," he claimed. Amara continued, her voice gaining strength, "that he's offered me a generous settlement of $5,000 monthly despite his financial struggles. He painted himself as a man stretched thin, doing his best to be fair." Hawthorne finally found his voice. "Your Honor, the financial disclosures were submitted in accordance with—" "Mr. Hawthorne," Judge Whitmore interrupted, "I suggest you stop talking. Ms. Blake, continue." Amara pulled a folder from her bag, physical papers, meticulously organized. "Before I was a mother, Your Honor, I was a digital compliance auditor. For 15 years, I specialized in tracking financial crimes and recovering encrypted data for corporations and government agencies. It's how I met Mr. Blake, actually. I was auditing a contractor his company worked with." The color drained from Victor's face. He'd forgotten. Or more accurately, he'd never bothered to remember. To him, Amara's job had been background noise, something boring she did before becoming his wife. "When we separated," Amara said, "Mr. Blake moved assets aggressively. He assumed I wouldn't notice or wouldn't understand. But I documented everything." She opened the folder. Folder 4 on the USB drive contains bank statements from 12 shell companies, all registered in the past 18 months, all using variations of employee names or holding companies that trace back to Mr. Blake. Hawthorne's briefcase fell off the table. He didn't pick it up. "The total," Amara said, "approximately $47 million hidden in offshore accounts, domestic LLCs, and cryptocurrency wallets. Mr. Blake didn't just lie about his finances. He committed fraud to avoid paying equitable spousal support and to position himself as the more stable parent." Judge Whitmore's jaw clenched. He looked at Victor with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Blake, you stood in my courtroom and testified under oath that you were nearly bankrupt." Those accounts are business expenses, investments," Victor stammered. "They're hidden assets," Amara said calmly, "and I have the wire transfers to prove it. Every transaction, every shell company filing, every cryptocurrency conversion. It's all documented." She placed the folder on the table. "I also recovered deleted emails between Mr. Blake and his accountant discussing how to minimize exposure during the divorce. The accountant specifically wrote, 'If she doesn't know to look for the Cayman accounts, we're clear.' But I didn't know to look. Because that's what I do." The gallery was in full uproar now. Reporters were shouting questions. Camera flashes erupted from the hallway. Judge Whitmore stood, his face flushed with anger. "Mr. Blake, you have perpetrated a fraud on this court. You have perjured yourself regarding both the injury to your child and your financial status. You have coached a minor to lie to medical professionals. And you have attempted to manipulate these proceedings through deception and intimidation." "Your Honor, I can explain," Victor tried. "No," Judge Whitmore said flatly. "You can't. Bailiff, place Mr. Blake under arrest. Charges of perjury, child endangerment, and fraud. And given his substantial hidden assets and obvious flight risk, bail is denied." The bailiffs moved forward. Victor tried to pull away. "You can't do this. I have rights. I'll have your job, Whitmore." "Add contempt of court to the charges," Judge Whitmore said. "Get him out of my courtroom." As they cuffed him, Victor turned to Amara, his face twisted with rage and desperation. "You think you've won? I'll destroy you. I'll make sure you never work again. I'll take everything from you. You'll what?" Amara interrupted quietly. "You're going to prison, Victor. You have nothing left to take." The words hit him like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged. For a moment, the performance fell away completely, and he was just a man who'd underestimated the wrong person. How long, he whispered. How long were you planning this? Amara's expression didn't change. Since the moment you told me to think about custody. Since you made it clear that if I fought you openly, you'd bury me. So I didn't fight openly. I fought smart. The bailiffs dragged him toward the side exit. Victor's expensive shoes scraped against the courtroom floor. His shouts echoed down the hallway. Threats, pleas, incoherent rage, until a door slammed and cut them off. Silence descended on the courtroom. Judge Whitmore sat back down slowly. He looked exhausted. Ms. Blake, I apologize. This court nearly failed you and your daughter because I allowed myself to be influenced by Mr. Blake's reputation and resources. That was wrong. You asked the right question, Your Honor, Amara said. That's all I needed. Custody is granted to you, fully and permanently. All of Mr. Blake's assets are frozen pending investigation by the district attorney and the IRS. Mr. Hawthorne, you're dismissed from this case. I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney for your former client. Hawthorne grabbed his briefcase and fled without a word. Judge Whitmore looked at Amara one last time. Ms. Blake, I've been on this bench for 32 years. I've never seen anything like this. You waited for the exact right moment. You documented everything. You didn't let emotion override strategy. You protected your daughter by being patient. Amara nodded. Patience was all I had. No, the judge said. You had courage. There's a difference. Rebecca Chun was crying openly now, laughing and crying at the same time. We won. Oh my God, we actually won. But Amara didn't feel like she'd won. She felt like she'd survived. As she packed her bag, a reporter pushed through. Ms. Blake, how does it feel? What do you want people to know? Amara looked at the camera. She thought about every woman who'd ever been told to stay quiet. Every mother who'd been painted as crazy for protecting her child. Every person who'd been underestimated because they didn't perform their strength loudly. I want people to know, she said carefully, that silence isn't consent. And it isn't surrender. Sometimes, silence is the most dangerous weapon someone can carry. She walked out of the courtroom. Behind her, Victor Blake's empire began to crumble. But ahead of her, her daughter was waiting. And for the first time in 2 years, Amara knew Lena was safe. The courthouse steps were a war zone of cameras, microphones, and shouting reporters. Amara emerged into the late afternoon sun, squinting against the sudden brightness after 4 days in fluorescent-lit misery. Rebecca walked beside her, trying unsuccessfully to create space between Amara and the media swarm. Ms. Blake. Ms. Blake. A reporter from Channel 5 thrust a microphone toward her face. How long were you planning to expose your ex-husband? Ms. Blake. Did you know about the hidden money during your marriage? What do you say to people claiming you manipulated the system? Amara stopped walking. The crowd pressed closer. Rebecca grabbed her elbow. You don't have to say anything. We can leave right now. But Amara had been silent for 4 days. And now, she had something to say. My name is Amara Blake, she said, her voice steady and clear. For 2 years, I documented my ex-husband's abuse of our daughter because I knew that without irrefutable proof, the system would favor his wealth and reputation over my word. I was right. Even with evidence, I had to wait for the precise moment when he would commit perjury before anyone would take me seriously. The cameras focused. The reporters fell silent. I didn't manipulate the system, Amara continued. I survived it. There's a difference. And if you want to write a story, write about how many mothers lose custody because they can't afford forensic accountants or private investigators. Write about how abuse is dismissed when the abuser is charming and successful. Write about why women have to become experts in surveillance just to protect their children. She looked directly into the CNN camera. I'm not the villain here. And I'm not the victim. I'm a mother who did what she had to do. That's the story. She walked away, leaving the reporters stunned into momentary silence before they erupted with follow-up questions. But Amara was already gone, climbing into Rebecca's beat-up Honda Civic. Inside the car, Rebecca gripped the steering wheel. That was amazing. You're going to be everywhere by tonight. I don't care about everywhere, Amara said quietly. I need to get Lena. Lena was staying with Amara's sister, Maya, across town. The drive took 20 minutes through Seattle traffic. Amara stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Her phone buzzed incessantly, news alerts, messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, interview requests from morning shows. She turned it off. When they arrived at Maya's small bungalow, Lena was in the front yard drawing with chalk. She looked up when the car pulled into the driveway, and her face split into a gap-toothed smile. "Mama." Amara was out of the car before it fully stopped. She scooped Lena into her arms, holding her daughter so tightly the girl squeaked in protest. "Mama, you're squishing me." "I know. I'm sorry." Amara buried her face in Lena's hair, breathing in the smell of strawberry shampoo and childhood. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too. Aunt Maya said you were fighting a dragon." Amara laughed, sharp and sudden, close to tears. "Something like that." Maya stood on the porch, arms crossed, tears streaming down her face. She was 3 years younger than Amara, a high school teacher with a fierce protective streak. She'd wanted to testify at the trial, but Amara had refused. "The less he knows about my support system, the better," she'd said. Now, Maya just nodded. "You did it." "I did it," Amara echoed. That night, after Lena fell asleep in Amara's bed, still nervous about being alone, Amara sat in her small kitchen with a cup of tea she didn't drink. Her phone, turned back on, showed 247 missed calls and over 1,000 messages. Some were hateful. Victor had friends, business partners, people who refused to believe he could hurt a child. To them, Amara was the threat, the woman who disrupted their comfortable narrative. But then there were other messages. "Thank you. I lost custody of my kids because I couldn't prove what was happening. You give me hope. My sister is going through this right now. Can I share your story with her? You're a hero to every mother who's been called crazy for protecting her child." Amara closed her eyes. She wasn't a hero. She was just someone who'd had the skills and the patience to do what needed to be done. But if her story helped even one person understand that silence could be strategic, then maybe the last 2 years of hell had been worth it. The next morning, the story was everywhere. Real estate mogul arrested on child abuse and fraud charges. Mother's secret recording exposes billionaire's lies. Ex-wife plays 4-day-long game in stunning courtroom reveal. By noon, Victor's company issued a statement. Blake Development is cooperating fully with authorities. Mr. Blake has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of legal proceedings. By evening, the board voted to remove him entirely. By the end of the week, federal investigators had seized his assets and begun untangling the web of shell companies and hidden accounts. Victor Blake, who'd controlled an empire, lost everything in 7 days. But Amara wasn't watching his fall. She was too busy rebuilding. She enrolled Lena in a new school, closer to their apartment. She accepted a contract with a cybersecurity firm that had reached out after seeing the news. They wanted her expertise in forensic data recovery. She started therapy for both herself and Lena, working through the trauma that Victor had left behind. And slowly, carefully, they began to heal. 3 weeks after the trial, Amara received a letter from the district attorney's office. Victor had been officially charged with child endangerment, perjury, fraud, and witness tampering. The trial was set for 6 months out. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. "Ms. Blake, your documentation is the most thorough I've seen in 20 years as a prosecutor. Because of your work, we have an airtight case. Thank you for your courage." Amara folded the letter and put it in a drawer. She didn't need thanks. She had her daughter back. That was enough. Victor Blake was released on house arrest after 3 weeks in county jail. The bail hearing had been contentious. The DA argued he was a flight risk. His new attorney argued his rights were being violated. The judge compromised. $5 million bail, GPS ankle monitor, surrender of passport, and confinement to his penthouse. Victor paid the bail by liquidating one of the few accounts the feds hadn't frozen yet. A cryptocurrency wallet he'd forgotten to mention to his own lawyers. He returned to the Obsidian Tower on a gray Tuesday morning. The doorman avoided eye contact. The elevator ride to the 50th floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, Victor stepped into his penthouse and stopped. It was too quiet. "Vanessa," he called out. His fiancée had promised to wait for him, had sworn she believed him, had posted on Instagram about standing by her man. No answer. Victor walked through the living room. The furniture was still there, but personal items were gone. He climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. The closet doors were open. Empty hangers swayed slightly. Her jewelry box, gone. Her designer shoes, gone. On the bed was a single piece of paper. "Victor, I can't do this. The lawyers say you might get 10 years. My publicist says association with you is brand suicide." I told the FBI everything about the LLC accounts. They offered me immunity, and I took it. I'm not going down with you. I'm in Monaco. Don't look for me. V. Victor crumpled the note, his hands shaking. He threw a lamp across the room. It shattered against the wall. He flipped the nightstand, kicked a hole in the closet door, screamed until his voice went raw. When the rage finally subsided, he sat on the edge of the bed, breathing hard. Vanessa was gone. Fine. He still had the company. He still had the board. He still had leverage. He grabbed his phone and dialed Marcus Chun, the Blake Development CFO and his oldest friend. Marcus, it's me. I need you to. Victor. Marcus's voice was cold. I can't talk to you. Company policy. What? Marcus, it's me. We've known each other for 20 years. The board voted this morning. You're out. Effective immediately. Security will box up your office belongings. Don't come to the building. The line went dead. Victor stared at his phone. Out. They couldn't force him out. He was the founder. He owned. He opened his laptop, pulling up the corporate documents. Blake Development's ownership structure. He'd always maintained controlling interest. 51%. No one could remove him without his consent. He logged into the corporate registry. Access denied. He tried again. Same result. Panicking now, he called his attorney. Why am I locked out of the company's servers? Mr. Blake, as I explained yesterday, the board initiated an emergency restructure. They're claiming you violated fiduciary duty by hiding assets and exposing the company to legal liability. They can't do that without majority shareholder approval. They had it. Someone called for a vote. Someone with enough shares to override your position. Victor's blood went cold. Who? The filing lists an entity called Vanguard Holdings LLC. They apparently purchased a controlling stake in Blake Development 2 years ago. Very quietly. The transaction was legal, but structured through enough intermediaries that it didn't trigger disclosure requirements. 2 years ago, right around the time Amara asked for a separation. Who owns Vanguard Holdings? Victor asked, though he already knew. The lawyer paused. Amara Blake. She's been the majority shareholder of your company for 2 years, Victor. You've been working for her this whole time. The phone slipped from Victor's hand. Impossible. Amara didn't have that kind of money. She'd never shown interest in his business. She'd been a housewife, a mother, No. She'd been a digital compliance auditor. A woman who tracked money and recovered data. A woman he'd completely underestimated. Victor pulled up his email, searching frantically. 2 years ago, Blake Development had been struggling. A failed project in Portland had nearly bankrupted them. Then, miraculously, an anonymous investor had provided an emergency cash infusion. $15 million. Enough to save the company and fund 3 new developments. Victor had been so grateful he hadn't asked questions. The investor's representative had structured it as a quiet partnership. No board seat, no public disclosure, just silent backing. Victor had signed the papers without reading them carefully. Why would he? The company was saved. He pulled up the documents now, really reading them for the first time. Vanguard Holdings had controlling interest. Vanguard Holdings had veto power over major decisions. Vanguard Holdings could remove the CEO with board approval. And Vanguard Holdings was Amara. She hadn't just documented his abuse. She hadn't just hidden and waited. She'd owned him. For 2 years, Victor Blake had been building an empire he didn't control, making decisions that could be overridden at any time, living in a penthouse that technically belonged to the company his ex-wife owned. He'd never seen it coming because he'd never thought she was smart enough, capable enough, strategic enough. He'd thought she was weak. Victor stood up, pacing the empty bedroom. He called the board chairman, a man named Robert Fielding who'd been Victor's mentor once. Robert, we need to talk. This restructure is. Victor, stop. It's over. The board met with Vanguard Holdings' representative this morning. She presented a comprehensive plan for the company moving forward. Ethical practices, transparent accounting, community investment, everything you weren't. Amara was there. She was professional, prepared, and impressive. Everything you said she wasn't. The board voted unanimously to accept her leadership. You're out. You can't do this. We already did. Goodbye, Victor. The line went dead. Victor sank to the floor, his back against the bed. Around him, his empty penthouse echoed with silence. Amara hadn't just beaten him in court. She'd beaten him everywhere. She'd owned his company while he degraded her as financially irresponsible. She'd documented his crimes while he called her emotionally unstable. She'd positioned herself 3 moves ahead while he assumed she was barely keeping up. And she'd never said a word. Not until the exact moment it would destroy him completely. Victor Blake sat in his empty penthouse, wearing an ankle monitor, facing a decade in prison, stripped of his company and his reputation, and finally understood. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was power he'd never seen coming. And Amara Blake had wielded it perfectly. 1 year later, Amara stood backstage at the Seattle Convention Center, smoothing down the deep blue dress she'd bought specifically for this evening. It was elegant but not flashy, professional but not severe. Through the curtain, she could hear the low murmur of the crowd. Over 300 people gathered for the annual Voices for Justice Foundation Gala. Ms. Blake, a young woman with a headset, peeked around the corner. "You're on in 5 minutes." Amara nodded, her stomach fluttering with nerves she thought she'd overcome. She'd testified at Victor's trial. She'd sat through countless interviews. She'd rebuilt her entire life under public scrutiny. But somehow, speaking at a gala felt more intimidating than all of it. In the front row, Lena sat between Aunt Maya and Rebecca Chun. Lena wore a purple dress, her favorite color, and had insisted on doing her own hair. It was lopsided but earnest, and when she caught Amara's eye through a gap in the curtain, she waved enthusiastically. Amara waved back, her chest tight with love and gratitude. The past year had been transformative. Victor's trial had lasted 3 weeks. The evidence Amara provided, the audio recordings, the financial documents, the deleted emails, had been so comprehensive that Victor's defense crumbled on day 4. He'd taken a plea deal, 8 years in federal prison for child endangerment, fraud, and perjury. He'd been transferred to a facility in Oregon 2 months ago. Amara hadn't attended sentencing. She'd been too busy rebuilding. Blake Development, restructured and renamed Vanguard Development, now operated with complete financial transparency. Amara had installed an independent board, hired a new CEO with an impeccable ethical record, and redirected 10% of annual profits to affordable housing initiatives. The company was smaller but more sustainable. And more importantly, it wasn't built on lies anymore. Amara herself had returned to consulting work, specializing in helping domestic violence survivors document abuse and protect themselves legally. She'd testified before the state legislature about reforming custody procedures. She'd been interviewed for a documentary about strategic silence as a survival tool. But tonight wasn't about her work. Tonight was about the foundation she'd helped establish, Voices for Justice, dedicated to providing legal and financial support for abuse survivors navigating custody battles. "Ms. Blake, you're up," the stage manager whispered. Amara took a deep breath and walked on stage. The applause was immediate and sustained. She stood at the podium, blinking against the stage lights, waiting for the crowd to settle. When they finally quieted, she gripped the edges of the lectern and began. "A year ago," she said, her voice steady, "I sat in a courtroom and stayed silent while my ex-husband lied about who I was. He called me unstable, irresponsible, unfit, and I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't speak at all until the moment I knew my words would matter most." She paused, scanning the crowd. Some faces were familiar, other survivors she'd worked with, advocates she'd met through her testimony. Others were strangers who'd followed her story. People asked me afterward, "How did you stay quiet for so long? How did you not scream or cry or break down?" And the answer is simple: I couldn't afford to. When you're fighting someone with more money, more power, more credibility, you can't waste your ammunition on battles you'll lose. You have to wait. You have to document. You have to be patient even when patience feels like you're swallowing glass. Amara's voice strengthened. Silence gets mistaken for weakness, for consent, for surrender. But for many of us, especially women, especially mothers, especially people the system doesn't automatically believe, silence is strategy. It's survival. It's the difference between fighting a war you'll lose today and winning a war you've been preparing for tomorrow. In the front row, Lena was watching her with wide, serious eyes. "I didn't stay silent because I was afraid," Amara continued. "I stayed silent because I was learning, listening, gathering proof, building a case so airtight that when I finally spoke, no one could dismiss me. And that's what I want every person in this room to understand. Your silence doesn't mean you've accepted what's happening to you. Sometimes, silence is the loudest thing you can do. The applause started again, but Amara held up a hand. This foundation exists because too many people are forced to choose between speaking up and being dismissed or staying quiet and being destroyed. We provide forensic accountants, legal support, documentation training, and safe housing for survivors who need time to build their cases. Because everyone deserves the tools to fight back effectively, not just those of us who happen to have the right professional background. She looked directly at Lena. My daughter doesn't remember much about that night. She was too young, and trauma has a way of protecting children by erasing what hurts most. But she knows she's safe now. She knows her mother fought for her. And when she's old enough to understand how, I hope she learns that fighting doesn't always look like yelling. Sometimes, it looks like patience. Amara stepped back from the podium. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. She nodded her thanks, then walked off stage, her hands shaking slightly with adrenaline and relief. After the gala, a reporter from NPR approached her in the lobby. Ms. Blake, can I ask you one more question? Amara hesitated, then nodded. Do you have any regrets? About how you handled things? About the silence? Amara considered this. I regret that silence was necessary. I regret living in a system where a mother has to become an expert in surveillance just to protect her child. I regret that my word alone wasn't enough. But do I regret the strategy? No, because it worked. And my daughter is safe. That's all that matters. The reporter smiled. Last question. What would you say to someone going through something similar right now? Amara thought of all the messages she'd received over the past year. Hundreds of women, and some men, trapped in situations where speaking up meant losing everything. I'd say this, Amara answered quietly. Document everything. Save every text, every email, every voicemail. Keep a journal with dates and times. Take photos. Record conversations where legal. Build your case quietly and carefully. Don't announce your plans to the person you're escaping. Don't give them a chance to prepare. And when the moment comes, when you finally have enough proof that they can't deny, speak once, speak clearly, and speak with evidence they can't refute. She paused. And I'd tell them they're not alone. That silence doesn't make them weak. That patience is a form of power. And that eventually, the truth doesn't just speak, it roars. The reporter thanked her. Amara rejoined her family, and they walked out of the convention center together into the cool Seattle night. Lena grabbed her hand. Mama, when I grow up, I want to be brave like you. Amara knelt down, eye level with her daughter. You're already brave, sweetheart. You survived something terrible, and you're still kind and joyful and full of light. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. Lena hugged her tightly. I love you, Mama. I love you too. More than anything. As they walked to the car, Amara thought about Victor, locked in a cell 200 miles away, his empire gone, his reputation destroyed, his freedom taken. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt resolved. Justice didn't always look like vengeance. Sometimes, it just looked like safety. A year ago, she'd sat in a courtroom and waited for one question. Now, she was rebuilding a life where her daughter would never have to. Because silence had never been surrender. It had been preparation. And sometimes, the most dangerous thing someone could do was wait for the perfect moment to speak. Amara Blake had waited. And when she spoke, everything changed.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Subscribe, like, and click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.